After my mother-in-law Margaret's death, the house sank into a strange silence. Everything was still in its place, yet it all felt incomplete, as if something invisible had left the house, and with it, all the stability had gone too. Every morning, I woke up and followed the same routine, but deep inside, I felt like something had broken, something that would never be fixed again. The days after the funeral passed slowly. People kept coming, offering condolences, flowers kept withering, and I handled everything in a mechanical way. But through all of it, one thing remained constant: Ethan's changing behavior, his distance. The way he dismissed everything casually, as if our marriage had become nothing more than a responsibility to him. I had noticed it before too. He had started coming home late. There were unknown notifications on his phone, and whenever I asked, he would either laugh it off or show irritation. And I kept convincing myself that maybe I was overthinking, maybe grief was making me too sensitive. But somewhere deep inside, there was a voice telling me that something wasn't right. When the day of the will reading arrived, I thought it would just be a formal process, a kind of closure where everything would be legally wrapped up and life would move on. But I had no idea that this day was going to become the biggest shock of my life, a moment that would change everything forever. As I stood outside the lawyer's office, I took a deep breath, composed myself, and opened the door. But the moment my eyes fell inside the room, my body froze for a second, because Ethan was there. And he wasn't alone. A woman was sitting beside him, completely composed, completely prepared, and in her arms was a small baby wrapped in a gray cashmere blanket, so peaceful as if no tension existed in the world. And in that single moment, I felt like the entire narrative of my life was changing right in front of my eyes. My gaze fixed on the baby, then slowly moved to the woman's face, and then returned to Ethan, as if my mind was trying to process 3 different truths at the same time, but none of them were being fully accepted. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy. My steps moved forward but in control, as if I didn't want to fall, as if I didn't want to expose my weakness in front of them. And with every step, my doubt was turning into reality. "What is this, Ethan?" My voice sounded normal, but inside, everything had been shaken. I looked straight into his eyes, as if he no longer had the option to lie, as if I was forcing him to tell the truth. Ethan didn't look away even for a second. He didn't react awkwardly either. Instead, he remained as calm as he always was, and that calmness disturbed me even more, because there wasn't a trace of guilt in it. Ethan didn't answer, but the woman spoke instead, her voice steady, as if she had rehearsed it beforehand. "He's Daniel's." And after that, a strange silence spread across the room, echoing in my ears. I immediately looked at Ethan, with one last hope that maybe he would deny it, maybe he would say it was all a lie. But he just looked at me. Directly, calmly, and without saying a word, he accepted everything. In that single moment, I understood what 10 years of marriage had meant to him: an arrangement, a convenience. And I was just a part of that system. No priority, no loyalty, and worst of all, no regret. The shock was expected, but what I felt wasn't shock. It was a heavy confirmation, as if all those small doubts I had been ignoring for months had gathered in one place and were now saying, "See, we were right." I pulled a chair and decided to sit down because standing was becoming difficult, but I didn't want to fall. I didn't want to break in front of them. And inside me, a new emotion was rising: anger. But controlled anger. The lawyer cleared his throat, as if trying to break the awkward silence. But even in his eyes, there was confusion. Perhaps even he hadn't expected the will reading to turn into a personal scandal. The woman, Lauren, adjusted the baby slightly. There was a strange confidence in her movement, as if she belonged here, as if she had come to claim her place. And that attitude irritated me even more. Ethan leaned back slightly, one hand resting on the chair, completely relaxed. His body language clearly said that he had already made his decision, and now he didn't feel the need to explain anything. I took a deep breath, controlled my emotions, and in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't react. I would respond, because this was no longer just an affair. This was a game of power, and I was not going to lose. The lawyer finally opened the file. His hands steady but controlled, yet a faint tension still lingered in his eyes. As if he knew this was no ordinary will reading, and everyone in the room was now sitting with some expectation. I kept my gaze straight ahead, but inside I was observing everything. The way Ethan's relaxed posture contrasted with Lauren's calculated calm, and the baby, still unaware, sleeping quietly, as if its mere existence had already shifted the balance of the room. According to Margaret Caldwell's will, the lawyer began reading, his voice steady, yet every word carried weight, as though each sentence had the power to change someone's life. Ethan slightly adjusted his posture, paying attention to the file for the first time, while Lauren tightened her hold on the baby, mentally preparing for any announcement that might favor her. The initial assets were listed: properties, accounts, investments, all read out in a structured manner, and I remained silent, knowing the real moment was yet to come. The clause Margaret had deliberately included. For a brief second, the room paused. The lawyer turned the page, and his voice shifted slightly, signaling he was about to read the part that could overturn everything. My heartbeat began to quicken. The primary estate, he clearly said, is to go to my daughter-in-law, Olivia. And after that single line, the atmosphere in the room changed, as if someone had suddenly switched control. Ethan's face froze for the first time. A flicker of confusion appeared in his eyes, clearly unexpected. Lauren's expression also cracked for a moment, her confident smile wavering slightly. I stayed completely still, but a cold satisfaction spread through me, because this was the moment Margaret had planned for, the moment Ethan had no clue was coming. The lawyer continued, now reading with the authority that made any decision final. This inheritance is conditional. And the condition is that if my son breaks his marital responsibilities, or proves unfaithful in any way, he will have no claim on the estate. Complete silence fell across the room, a silence where everyone recalculated their positions. Ethan was now sitting upright, his previous relaxed posture gone, as if the ground beneath him had been pulled away. Lauren immediately looked at Ethan. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in her eyes, as if she realized she had never truly understood the rules of the game she had been confident about. I slowly lifted my fingers from the table in a controlled movement and looked at Ethan. This time, my gaze held not helplessness, but a sharp, clear confidence, the kind that only comes when you hold the power. Ethan finally tried to speak, but his voice lacked the usual control. "This doesn't change anything," he said, yet his words only exposed his body language as false. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low but each word clear. "No, Ethan. Everything has changed now." And in that moment, I knew the game had officially turned. The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. Where Ethan had once seemed in control, there was now visible unease in his eyes, and Lauren's confidence was beginning to crack as well, as if both of them were finally realizing that the situation had slipped out of their hands. Ethan tried to rise from his seat, as if he could regain control of the situation verbally, but his body language lacked the authority it once had. Instead, there was a desperation he couldn't hide. Watching him, I could tell he was no longer planning. He was reacting. "You can't take this seriously," he said, but the firmness in his voice was gone. For the first time, I felt like he wasn't trying to convince me. He was trying to convince himself, still clinging to the illusion that everything was under his control. Without moving from my place, I looked at him. My breathing was steady, and the anger inside me had transformed into a cold clarity. "I'm not just taking this seriously. I'm going to enforce it legally," I said quietly, each word landing like a reality check. Lauren pulled the baby a little closer, as if trying to protect her position, but the calculated calm in her eyes was gone. In its place was fear, the kind that clearly said she had never imagined this outcome. "Ethan," she said softly, as if seeking reassurance. But Ethan wasn't in a position to reassure anyone anymore. The shift in power was so obvious that everyone in the room could feel it. I glanced at the baby, who stirred slightly, as if about to wake. For a brief second, conflicting emotions rose within me, but I immediately reminded myself, this was not the center of my story. My decision was. The lawyer calmly slid the documents toward me, a silent signal that the next step was mine. Without hesitation, I picked them up as if I had already decided what I was going to do. Ethan stepped closer. "Olivia, wait. We can talk," he said. But his voice no longer carried the confidence that once manipulated me. This time it sounded like a request, genuine, perhaps, but far too late. I looked at him one last time, without a single emotion he could read. "You lost the chance to talk a long time ago," I said plainly. And in that moment, I felt it. I had finally stepped out of the cycle, where I was always waiting for his explanations. Lauren remained silent, completely still, as if she had accepted that this situation was beyond her control. The presence that once seemed so strong now felt like nothing more than a fading shadow. I stood up, documents in hand, and walked toward the door without looking back. Every step was a decision, a closure, and a signal of a new beginning, one where I would no longer be defined by someone else's lies or betrayal. As I stepped out of the office, the air felt slightly cold. But inside me there was a strange calm, as if after a long battle, silence had finally arrived. And within that silence, there was clarity that whatever came next would finally be under my control.